Hi, everyone. I'm Yasmin Vasugian in for Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. Here is what's happening. President Biden back on home turf today and rolling up his sleeves to tackle infrastructure, which seems to be gaining bipartisan support. Meanwhile, at the Capitol, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is slamming Democrats and their voting rights bill, calling it an election takeover bill.
There is no rational basis for the federal government trying to take over all of American elections.
And at a hospital in Houston, no jab, no job. Employees are pushing back, saying the hospital's vaccine mandate is unfair.
I don't trust the safety of this. I do not believe that it has been tested adequately.
We start today with NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman, who's at the White House for us. Josh, good to see you this afternoon. Thanks for joining us on this. Let's talk numbers here. You got 11 Republican senators supporting the bipartisan infrastructure deal. Some Democrats, though, they are threatening to vote against this bill because they say it doesn't go far enough, right? A lot of progressive Democrats saying this. What's the president thinking on this?
Well, the first job for the president, Yasmin, is to get up to speed on what's even being discussed in Congress. The president, as he was leaving Geneva, heading back from that summit with Vladimir Putin yesterday, said he had not had a chance yet to read the framework that this group of bipartisan senators has come up with. But White House officials had said that today the president was expected to get a briefing from his aides who had a chance to meet with the Democrats who are part of that Senate group yesterday. The president looking to see whether the pay-fors in this bill are something he's going to be able to accept. There's been a lot of back and forth between the White House and Congress on that. And we knew that one of the sticking points had been the president's pledge not to raise taxes on middle-class Americans and an idea to actually peg the gas tax to inflation, whether that would violate that pledge. So the president trying to find a way to strike this bipartisan deal on the infrastructure part of his agenda, and then perhaps come back later with a second bill through the reconciliation process that would bypass Republicans and get some of that other spending that the president wants on climate change and other issues that Republicans, as of now, don't seem willing to entertain.
So, look, the president hitting U.S. soil. He's got a lot on his plate. Obviously, infrastructure, as we just mentioned, also signing this Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law just this afternoon, officially making June 19th, just 2 days from now, the date marking the end of slavery in the United States, a federal holiday. What is he doing to mark this occasion?
The president holding a very grand ceremony today in the East Room, joined by a long list of lawmakers, as well as some other names from entertainment and music. We spotted Usher in the audience there. The president talking about slavery as America's original sin, and saying that this national holiday would be one way for us to take stock of the moral sin of slavery as a nation. We also heard at that ceremony from this vice president, Kamala Harris, who said this.
As we establish Juneteenth as our newest national holiday, let us be clear about what happened on June 19th, 1865, the day we call Juneteenth. Because you see, that day was not the end of slavery in America. Yes, on that day, the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas, learned that they were free. But in fact, 2.5 years earlier, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in the Confederacy. So think about that. For more than 2 years, the enslaved people of Texas were kept in servitude.
The federal government wasting no time in putting this into place because Juneteenth actually falls on the Saturday this year, Yasmin. The government says that they will give tomorrow, the 18th, as a national paid holiday for federal workers, starting a tradition on Juneteenth that will carry us into the future.
Also, some major news on COVID, Josh, that I just want to touch on while I have you. $3.2 billion investment for antiviral pills. What more do you know on this?
Well, these pills are not going to replace the vaccine, which, of course, will remain the centerpiece of addressing COVID. But Dr. Fauci saying, look, we already have effective antiviral treatments for things like AIDS, where essentially you can take a pill and you won't get as sick as you would have without taking that. And so this $3+ billion investment from the federal government, but we'll be seeking to galvanize research, development, as well as distribution of an antiviral pill that can be used as one of the measures that we will will have in our arsenal to address COVID-19 in the future.
Josh Letterman, good to see you. Thanks so much. All right, so Mitch McConnell drawing a line in the sand on voting rights. The Senate Minority Leader calling the Democrats' plan unacceptable as Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer moves ahead with plans to vote on the For the People Act. Let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake on this. Garrett, good to see you this afternoon. Thanks for joining us on this. Let's start first with Republicans here. What else are we hearing from McConnell on this?
Look, Republicans are totally dug in on this. This is not an issue like infrastructure where the two parties may agree on a goal, but they disagree on how to get there or how much to spend. Republicans fundamentally don't think there should be federal government fingerprints on state and local elections, and they are not going anywhere near supporting the For the People Act or this new Joe Manchin version. Here's a little bit of what Mitch McConnell told us reporters earlier today.
It still turns the Federal Election Commission from a judge into a prosecutor by taking away the 3-3 balance and making it 3-2 Democratic. And in what is of extraordinarily dubious constitutionality, would remove redistricting from state legislatures and hand it over to computers. Equally unacceptable, totally inappropriate.
So there's two fronts here for Republicans. They think the more the American people know about what's in this bill, the less they'll like it. And they know that if they hold together here, it doesn't stand a chance of becoming law because the filibuster will still be in place.
Okay, so let's talk Dems then. Some major news today, it seems, from Senator Joe Manchin offering what seems to be a compromise on voting rights. Is this actually something that Democrats can get behind? And what is the Stacey Abrams endorsement doing?
Look, this Manchin compromise plan is a compromise essentially among Democrats, and it would mean more if Manchin coupled this statement about the things that he would agree to do in a voting rights bill with a statement about getting rid of the filibuster, because while it says what he would support, it doesn't say a lot about what he's willing to do for it. Here's Manchin earlier today talking about why he thinks bipartisanship here is still possible.
And I've been working across the aisle with all the Republicans trying to get people to understand that that's the bedrock of our democracy. An accessible, fair, and basically secured voting. That's it. Well, I've talked to everybody, and you know that basically Lisa Murkowski signed on to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act with me. So that's a start, and the bottom line is you just got to keep working.
Yasmin, you heard a reference to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act here. That's a separate bill that doesn't go nearly as far as any of the things proposed here, including by Manchin. And I can tell you, I have not seen a bill that Mitch McConnell personally hates as much as he does this bill. He had 15 other Republican senators today with him at that press conference. I have a very hard time seeing any of them peel off to support this bill. So movement in the short-term political sense, because at least now Democrats are united around a set of principles here on the Senate side. But in terms of moving this bill towards becoming law, there's still very, very, very long way to go.
Very long way to go. Garrett Haake, good to see you.
You bet.
The decisions are in. The Supreme Court ruling on two of the most anticipated cases of the term, delivering major victories for Obamacare and religious freedom against LGBTQ rights. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams is joining me now with more details on this. Pete, good to see you. Major victory here for Obamacare. I want to start with that first. The Supreme Court dismissing a challenge yet again. Walk us through this decision, Pete.
Right. I think you framed it exactly right. They didn't really rule on Obamacare. It's not a decision upholding Obamacare. It's a decision rejecting the challenge. That's the essence of the Supreme Court's ruling here. Remember, Obamacare originally said you have to buy health insurance or pay a penalty on your income tax. The Supreme Court in 2012 said that's a legitimate use of Congress's taxing authority. So along came the Republican Congress and set the tax at zero and said, OK, yeah, now there's no taxing authority. Now it's unconstitutional. And a group of red states sued on that basis. But today, the Supreme Court rejected them. They said the 18 red states and some others who sued didn't have the proper legal standing, couldn't get in the courthouse door, in essence, because they couldn't show that the law harmed them. Without a penalty, there really isn't a mandate requiring you to do anything. The law no longer requires you to buy health insurance, the Supreme Court said. So you can't argue that the tax provision or the mandate penalizes you or hurts you in any way. And that was the essence of the lawsuit. So the court tossed out the challenge. This was a 7-2 ruling with Justices Samuel Alito and Neil Gorsuch in the minority. In the majority were some of the court's conservatives and all the three liberals.
I want to talk about some of those conservatives that are in the majority and specifically what this means about the Supreme Court overall. Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, they joined the majority opinion, as you just mentioned. During Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings, Democrats, they argued that her confirmation would mean the end of Obamacare. What does this tell you about the ideological balance of the Supreme Court right now, Pete?
Well, it tells us a couple of things. Number one, it's not as hard and fast as some people thought. And secondly, this is an issue that appeals to conservatives because conservatives have been among the strongest advocates of this standing issue, saying you can't sue, you can't come in and challenge something unless you are directly harmed. You can show specific harm that's unique to you caused by this law. That's sort of standing doctrine is a conservative thing. So this is an argument that appealed to them.
Let's talk also about the Supreme Court unanimously ruling in favor of a Catholic foster care agency that was actually cut off by the city of Philadelphia after it refused to work with same-sex couples. But this decision, different than the Obamacare one, was a very narrow decision. Why is that?
Yeah, very narrow because it really is good only for the facts of this case. This involved Catholic Social Services, which said that it would not place foster children in the homes of same-sex parents because that would violate its religious freedom. So Philadelphia said, OK, if that's your view, then we're canceling the contract with you because we have a non-discrimination law and you're violating it. So Catholic Social Services sued, saying that violates their religious freedom. And today the Supreme Court ruled for Catholic Social Services. But the decision is based on the peculiarities of the way the contract was worded. The city said sometimes they would enforce various provisions of this law and sometimes they wouldn't. So on that basis, the Supreme Court said Catholic Social Services prevails. But the charity had asked the Supreme Court to say, look, anytime there's a law that applies to everybody, a non-discrimination law that's generally applied, there should be a religious exception to it. The Supreme Court did not go there, unanimously didn't go there. None of the justices would go that far. So this is sort of reminiscent. Remember a couple of years ago, the Masterpiece Cake case, the baker in California who wouldn't bake cakes for same-sex marriages. It was like that. In that ruling, the court said, well, he got a raw deal from the Colorado Human Rights Commission, so we're ruling for him. Here, it's a similar ruling for Catholic services under the facts of this case, but doesn't really have a broader significance. Doesn't say that county clerks all over America can now refuse to issue marriage licenses or businesses can refuse to allow same-sex customers. So
you kind of just answered my next question, but I just want to be clear for all the folks watching now, which is, are there any kind of broader implications here on any businesses or LGBTQ rights in general?
No, I don't think so. But here's the thing. I mean, the court really dodged the main question here, which is, you know, this comes from a long line of Supreme Court cases. Many years ago, there were some state employees in Oregon who were arrested for ingesting sacramental peyote, and the state said, you know what, you work on our counter-drug team, and so you're fired. And they said, well, yes, but we were using it for religious purposes. And that decision, written by Antonin Scalia, said there is no religious exception to generally applicable laws. That's what Catholic Social Services was hoping the Supreme Court would overrule, and it didn't. But this question's going to come back. Guess what? The Masterpiece Cake case is coming back to the Supreme Court because there was another round in the Colorado courts, and Jack Phillips, the baker, lost again, and he'll be back, and so will photographers, and so will florists and others. This question's going to continue to come back.
It's likely we're going to have this conversation yet again. Pete Williams, thank you as always for the clarity on this.
You bet.
Let's go to NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's following the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Simone, good to see you. What do you have today?
Hey, Yasmin, great to see you too. All right, we are going to kick things off with news from Pope Francis. So in a video message today, the Pope championing the right for all workers to organize in unions. He says that efforts to rebuild economies should include a push for dignified working conditions stemming from collective bargaining. And in Sri Lanka, a cargo ship carrying chemicals sank off the coast of the country's capital after catching fire. This is raising concerns about a potential environmental disaster disaster. The ship's operator saying that the wreck of the Express Pearl is now sitting on the seabed at a depth of 70 feet. And in Alaska, a missing hiker found alive after reporting an encounter with not one, but multiple bears on Tuesday. She was alone on the Pioneer Ridge Trail and contacted her husband about being charged by those bears and having to use bear spray. She was taken to the hospital with a few injuries, but it's unclear whether those were directly caused by a bear attack. And tennis icon Rafael Nadal is skipping both Wimbledon and the Tokyo Olympics after, quote, listening to his body, wanting time to recover between competitive seasons. Nadal says the goal is to, quote, prolong my career and continue to do what makes me happy. And in Botswana, miners unearthing a 1,000-carat diamond, which experts believe is the third largest gem quality stone to ever be mined. Now, Botswana's minerals minister saying the discovery could not have come at a better time since diamond sales took a huge hit from the pandemic. Yasmin, I'll send it back to you.
Let me just make a quick visit to Botswana. Thank you, Simone. All right, can your employer force you to get vaccinated? Many hospitals, colleges, and companies are requiring employees to get a COVID shot, but some workers are pushing back. NBC News senior national correspondent Kate Snow talked to a group of nurses in Houston who are refusing the vaccine, a battle that is playing out in court.
Yasmin, a federal judge dismissed the lawsuit that came from 117 employees at Houston Methodist out of their 26,000 total employees. They had argued that the vaccine requirement that they faced was unfair, but the judge in a stinging decision last week said that if they refuse to get the vaccine, they will need to find work somewhere else. They are now appealing that decision, but meantime, I sat down with 4 of the nurses who were part of that suit.
A hospital once inundated with COVID patients, now the stage for a different battle.
And my company could ask me to jump off a building if I wanted to. It doesn't mean I have to do it.
I don't believe I should have to make the choice to put this in my body to continue to do a job that I've been doing successfully for 14 years.
Asking us to do things that could be contrary to our own health and could be detrimental to our health for the sake of making other people feel comfortable, I don't believe is right.
I survived it, actually getting the virus. It makes no sense to me to go and get a shot for something that I've already survived.
Jennifer, Kara, Sarah, and Kathy have all chosen not to get vaccinated and are all losing their jobs at Houston Methodist. They're concerned the vaccine didn't go through extensive clinical trials before being given to the public.
If I were to take this vaccine, then therefore I am a part of a clinical trial that I do not want to be a part of.
But there were trials. This is not the trial, as you just said. There were trials.
I don't trust the safety of this. I do not believe that it has been tested adequately by any means.
None of them agree with the guidance from all major health authorities in the U.S. that the vaccines are effective and safe.
Every public health organization, the CDC, the FDA, say that it is safe and effective. Mm-hmm. You don't believe those organizations?
No, I don't. I do not believe them at all.
Federal agencies and the vast majority of medical experts say adverse reactions to the vaccines are exceedingly rare and that staying unvaccinated is much more dangerous.
The science is also very clear about unvaccinated people. You remain at risk of mild or severe illness, of death, or of spreading the disease to others.
Yet these nurses all argue they've seen adverse effects.
People that I have worked with, people that I know, family members, close friends that have had serious side effects.
Jennifer claims she's treated hundreds of patients at Houston Methodist who had adverse reactions to the vaccine, a statement the CEO of the hospital completely disputes.
It's a shame when we see misinformation put out there. That's completely inaccurate. Of course, we all see side effects of the vaccines. We know that sore arms and small low-grade fever and a number of other things happen. But for her to imply that there has been something more than that is frankly downright offensive to the people who work at Houston Methodist.
Dr. Mark Boom says 99% of employees are now vaccinated after first offering bonuses and then making it a condition of employment. Kathy says she resigned shortly after Dr. Boom sent an email reacting to the lawsuit, reading in part, "It is unfortunate that the few remaining employees who refuse to get vaccinated and put our patients first are responding in this way."
I felt like that was just another knife to the back. We had been there every day to go to work in an environment that wasn't safe. First, we were heroes, and now I feel like I'm the villain.
Well, I'm disappointed that she felt she felt that way. What I've heard repeatedly, time and time again, from the vast majority of employees is a big resounding thank you. A thank you for leading the way. A thank you for putting patient safety first.
3 of the nurses I spoke with are now trying to find new jobs in nursing. One, Kathy, told me that she will never work as a nurse again. She's been so soured by this whole experience. A note that they are 117 people who filed suit, and that is a very small percentage of the overall workforce at Houston Methodist. But they argue that there were even more of their colleagues who did not want to get the vaccine, but did only because they wanted a paycheck.
There's growing concern over COVID vaccination rates among Latinos in the United States. While the vaccine is readily available, the Latino community is lagging behind. NBC News Now co-anchor Morgan Radford went to Miami to find out why.
Yasmin, that's right. We are here in Miami, and we've been talking to people in the Latino community about how effective the outreach programs have been to get them vaccinated. We know that COVID has already killed disproportionate numbers of Black and brown people, typically because of the higher existence of comorbidities in those communities. But we're also seeing a lag in the vaccination rates. And while they've increased, for example, in states that have big populations of Latinos like California, Texas, here in Florida, those vaccination rates have increased about 10% in the last month, but they're still drastically lagging behind their white majority member counterpart. So, for example, here in Miami, about 43% of Latinos have been vaccinated compared to 80% of whites. And if you look across the country, 28% of Latinos have received at least one dose of their COVID vaccine. But when it comes to members in this community who say they might still be hesitant or they've been hearing hesitations about the vaccine, they say it typically comes down to a couple of reasons: access to the vaccine, but also mistrust. They're hearing lots of rumors and misinformation. Take a listen to something Catherine told me. She is currently awaiting her immigration papers, which is why we're not using her last name. And she's a single mother of 4. And she said initially she was afraid to get the vaccine because she was afraid that if she showed up to get it, someone would take her away from her kids. But she also said there were a significant number of rumors she heard. Take a listen to some of them she told me about.
¿Y qué dicen la gente acá? ¿Están listos para la vacuna? What are the people here saying? Are they ready for the vaccine?
Al inicio uno decía que se va a volver zombies.
¿Que va a volver?
Zombies.
Someone actually said you're going to turn into zombies? So you've heard rumors that by taking the vaccine, people would actually turn into zombies.
A que al ponerle la vacuna les introducían un chip.
So people also thought that by taking the vaccine, they would have a chip injected.
One of the other big obstacles that community leaders here have told us about is the fact that in a lot of these communities, for example, communities coming from Guatemala or coming from Mexico, some speak native indigenous languages. So they don't actually speak Spanish. And so some of these organizations have been partnering with the CDC to make sure they can translate those languages and so that everyone can get the right information about the vaccine and they can continue to attempt to close the vaccination gap.
A group of scientists calling for a deeper investigation into the origins of COVID-19, saying the possibility of a lab leak in China cannot be ruled out. A stark contrast from last year when a lot of the scientific community pointed to natural origins. So what's changed in this time? NBCNews.com science reporter Denise Chow is joining me now. Denise, good to see you this afternoon. Thanks for joining us on this. In your reporting, you actually say scientists are getting more comfortable discussing this possibility that COVID could have leaked from a lab in China. Speaking to 5 virologists about their thoughts on how COVID originated, and they say the scientific evidence remains unchanged. So what, in fact, did change over the last year?
Well, I think the change in the political climate in this country played at least a small role here. Some of the people that I've spoken to have said that, you know, if you remember sort of last year, there were scientists who spoke up about the possibility of a lab leak, or at least the need to investigate this possibility. But there was a lot of racist rhetoric that was surrounding this topic. The pandemic had been very politicized. And so there was at least some hesitation among some individuals to really be very vocal about it. And they were worried that their words would be misconstrued or that they would be fueling some of this racist rhetoric. But I think an important thing also to note is that some of these renewed calls to conduct a more thorough investigation have come because they've seen that efforts so far have fallen short. If you remember earlier this year, the World Health Organization jointly conducted an investigation with China, and they released a report in March, and they were talking about how this likely came from an animal, and they ruled out really the possibility of a lab leak. But there were all sorts of questions about how forthcoming and transparent China was during this investigation. And a lot of questions had not been answered. The researchers who were on the ground in Wuhan did not have full access to records, to data. So a lot of these calls have come sort of in response to suspicions that China is not sort of giving over all the information that we would need in order to get to the bottom of this question.
How forthcoming is China being now in these investigations?
They've talked about, cooperating with further investigations with the World Health Organization, but it's really difficult to say. It's very difficult to have sort of an independent investigation in China because everything sort of relies on the cooperation of the government there. So a lot of people are thinking that, we won't get real straight answers from any kind of joint investigation with China. At the same time, you can't really have an investigation in China without their cooperation. So it's a bit of a catch-22 in that regard.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So what is the likelihood we're going to find the origin of COVID-19 if, in fact, China is not being forthcoming and or truthful or as involved in the investigation process as the world would like?
I mean, it's possible that we won't know, and it's also possible that it will take a very, very long time. Ebola, HIV, so these are examples that have taken decades, and even to this day, with the Ebola virus that was first identified in 1976, and scientists sort of have a very good reason to believe that it came from a bat, but even still to this day, they have not found the actual specific species, that animal host. So it could take a very long time. These things are, the way that science happens is not always fast, and I know that's not a very satisfying answer to a lot of people, but that's sort of the reality, is that this may take years, it may take decades even.
What are the origin scenarios that folks are looking at right now? What could have happened?
Right. So there are three main scenarios that are on the table right now. The first being sort of this natural origin, that it came from an animal. That to most of the people that I've spoken to, at least most of the virologists I've spoken to, said that that's the most likely answer. If you look at sort of the history of infectious disease outbreaks and new viruses, that's sort of the most common way that it comes from an animal and it spills over into a human population. And so that's the first natural idea, that it came from nature. The second possibility is that the virus may have come from nature, but there was perhaps an accident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is this lab that's in Wuhan where the first cases of COVID-19 were reported. Perhaps it was mishandled. There were samples that were mishandled and it leaked into the community that way. And then the third possibility, the scenario that maybe there was something else going on at this Wuhan Institute of Virology, that there was sort of genetic engineering experiments, and that perhaps that was the way that this virus sort of leaked into the community.
Wow. Still so many questions, not a lot of answers. Denise Chow, thank you.
Thanks.
It is time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. It's Thursday, which means weekly jobless claims are out, and the numbers are disappointing. 412,000 Americans filing for first-time unemployment benefits last week, up 37,000 from the week before, and the highest number of claims in more than a month. CNBC senior congressional correspondent Ilan Mui is joining me now with more on this. Ilan, great to see you on this. Appreciate it. Economists, they were expecting 360,000 new claims for last week. What happened here, and what is behind the unexpected increase?
Well, the first thing to really know here is that these weekly numbers are extremely volatile. So rather than focus on what happens every single week, economists like to look at an average of these numbers over time. And when you look at the 4-week moving average, what you actually find is that that number is down by about 8,000. And over the past month, it is at the lowest level since the pandemic started. So the real issue in the economy that we're hearing now, both from businesses and from experts themselves, is that the issue is not too many people finding themselves out of a job. It's too many businesses not being able to find enough workers to fill the jobs that are open. So even though these numbers are volatile, the underlying narrative of the economic recovery picking up speed remains unchanged.
Want to switch gears here also and talk about the Federal Reserve. They're opting to keep interest rates fairly steady, but they're drastically raising the forecast for inflation. The Fed also shifting up the timeline for a rate hike. Want to play a little bit of Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell.
This is an extraordinarily unusual time, and we really don't have a template or any experience of a situation like this.
So what can we expect here? Not a lot of answers. What can we expect to possibly see a rate hike?
Yeah, so the main message, I think, from the Fed is that rate hikes will not happen for a very long time. Now, the market did get a little bit nervous because Fed officials now see the first rate hike likely happening in 2023 instead of 2024. But we know that 2 years is still a really long ways away. We know that a lot can happen in just a few weeks. And so the Fed is really not focused on rate hikes right now, and they've committed to supporting this recovery until it is complete.
What about inflation? Why are we seeing rates rising so high there?
Yeah, it's actually part of the good news economic story in that as the recovery picks up steam, we're seeing bottlenecks happen in specific sectors like used cars, like lumber, like airline tickets. And right now, the Fed believes that that is a transitory or temporary problem and that over time, as the recovery sort of evens out, it will go away. But that's a lot of the debate happening right now on Wall Street and amongst policymakers is how long are these price spikes going to last? And will that end up forcing the Fed and, folks in Washington to respond in a more aggressive way?
Thank you so much, Elon.
Thank you.
All right, the housing market, it's red hot right now, but with new home construction slowed and an inventory shortage, a new report revealing the U.S. is facing a major housing crisis. So what does all this mean for home buyers? Here's NBC News senior business correspondent Steph Rule.
Here, let me just show you that. On paper, Danielle and Kristen Sills are the perfect first-time home buyers.
Our credit is impeccable. Our savings are in check. We have zero debt, but in this market, we cannot compete.
They've upped their budget and widened their search of the Boston area, but the last house they bid on had 29 offers.
It sold for about 70 or 80,000 over what the asking price was. And it was a 1,200 square foot home.
One of the biggest issues, the lack of homes for sale, 20% fewer compared to a year ago.
We've built fewer homes this last decade than any decade going back to the 1960s. So going into the pandemic, we were already facing a housing shortage, and it's just gotten so much worse.
A new report finds the pace of construction slowed, creating a shortage of more than 5.5 million units.
You can't just flip a switch and create more housing.
The advice for buyers, do your research on what homes really sell for, not just the list price, and know your budget and your limit.
When might we see the housing market cool down?
I think the housing market has already started to cool a bit, but it's not going to be a situation where buyers are going to get a better deal if they wait.
Competition fierce, with buyers making big life changes as we move toward a post-pandemic world.
All right, fashion retailer Zara trending online for the wrong reasons. The company facing growing calls for a boycott after its head designer made anti-Palestinian comments during an online argument with Palestinian model Khaher Harhash. Rima Abdelkader is a senior reporter for Social News Gathering at NBC News. She joins me now with more on the story. Rima, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. This all began after Khaher Harhash shared screenshots of his exchange with Perelman on Instagram. You actually spoke with the model about the messages that he received. What did he tell you?
Yes, so I spoke with Mr. Harhash from Berlin yesterday about this incident. He shared how he was surprised that someone with her influence in fashion would engage in this manner, which he found hateful. In the interview, he said it was time for brands to stand up against anti-Palestinian hate.
So Perelman has since apologized, it seems, to Harhash. What did she say?
Yes, she appeared to backtrack after what she previously said, writing to Mr. Harhash that she was sorry. She wrote, quote, "Well, I guess it goes back to the old saying my grandmother said, which is anger is the beginning of bad judgment." And she also hopes he could forgive her. Mr. Harhash, though, said he didn't find her apology sincere and hopes that Zara could use this opportunity to also reach out to Palestinians and Muslims that he said have been offended by these remarks, as well as be a part of a campaign to empower Palestinian designers.
So what is Zara saying? What is the company that owns Zara saying? And specifically, what are they saying about Perelman?
Yes, we received a statement on Tuesday, and they said Zara does not accept any lack of respect to any culture, religion, country, race, or belief. Zara is a diverse company, and we shall never tolerate discrimination of any kind. We condemn these comments that do not reflect our core values of respect for one another, and we regret the offense that they have caused.
Rima, thank you so much.
Thank you, Yasmin.
All right, tension between Israelis and Palestinians remain in the aftermath of last month's fighting, but many on the ground there are working to create peace, especially amongst younger people. A group called Hand in Hand runs a network of integrated schools to help build trust between Jewish and Arab citizens. Here's more.
The education system in Israel is segregated according to ethnic and religious backgrounds. So overall, if I'm speaking generally, students in Israel rarely meet each other, Arabs and Jews, until after they graduate.
I think that whoever hasn't lived with Jews thinks of Jews what they have heard about them, and who hasn't lived with Arabs thinks about Arabs what they have heard about Arabs. And basically stereotypes ruins lives. Being open-minded to other people also affects how open-minded are you to other thoughts or opinions.
The ability to listen to other people's stories and not just hear them, but really listen and try and understand is kind of a muscle that we develop in school, and we keep working on it later in life after we finish.
We have the ability here in the school to come in the morning and talk about it and listen to others. And this is not something that is happening only in times of war. It's happening all the time. We discuss those issues constantly. Therefore, we're stronger in our ability to address those issues in difficult times.
We had a book that had both narratives on it. So they would talk about a certain thing that happened. Say, for example, a certain protest that took part in an Arab village. And so you would see the information, how it was described in the Jewish narrative and how it was described in the Palestinian narratives. And it's not the same. Usually the amount of people killed is not the same. People hurt is not the same. The whole story of who started the rioting is not the same. And so they really try to challenge us to look at both sides of every situation.
The Palestinian community in Israel, which I come from, are already kind of treated as second or third class citizens. So it's already very hard for you to get the same opportunities as my Jewish classmates or the Israelis that are Jewish. So having technical skills such as language and understanding the cultural mind of the Israeli community really helps.
Am I Israeli? Am I Jewish? Yeah. Do I identify that? Of course. But that doesn't mean I need to blindly support everything that is done in the name of an Israeli Jewish narrative. I can understand that the situation is complex.
I represent myself as a Palestinian, but I'm also part of the Israeli society and the Israeli country. So it's kind of like a mix of between both worlds. And it made me kind of look at the other side and, it's not just this black and white, it's not like Palestine and Israel. I came to understand that there's like a gray area in between, which is like people who are normal people who just want to have a normal life, live like without having to fear for their security or for the security of their children.
We never try and like erase what we don't like about each other. We always try and face it and talk about this and bring this to the front.
I alone can't change the world. I cannot change the world. But if I can change one person, that's enough for me.
Police now appealing to the public for help as they investigate the mysterious murders of a mother and son from a prominent South Carolina family. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has more on this.
Yasmin, South Carolina's law enforcement division set up a 24-hour tip line for any information about this double homicide case, while at the same time, police divers have been searching a river near the property, but authorities won't discuss what they're looking for.
In a coastal region of South Carolina, the chilling double homicide of two members of a prominent legal dynasty now under investigation from the state's law enforcement division, which is offering few details. 52-year-old Maggie Murdoch and her 22-year-old son Paul were found outside their home, both shot multiple times, according to the coroner. They were discovered by husband and father Alec Murdoch on their rural property 10 days ago. Alec called 911, according to police, but the call has not been made public. The murder sending shockwaves through the local community, where generations of the Murdoch family have worked as well-known lawyers and prosecutors, tied to countless legal cases in the South Carolina Lowcountry. In a statement, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division says it's committed to conducting a professional and thorough criminal investigation. But the agency has not held any press briefings since the killings. The governor recently saying law enforcement is working around the clock.
It is a tragic situation. The Murdoch family is well known and respected, and this is just tragic, starting with the boat accident.
The boat accident involved Paul Murdoch in 2019, who was set to face trial for his role in that crash that led to the death of 19-year-old Mallory Beach. She was thrown from the boat, her body discovered a week later. Prosecutors say Paul was driving the boat while intoxicated when it slammed into a piling, though he pleaded not guilty to several charges. And in another tragedy for the prominent family, patriarch Randolph Murdoch died just days ago at his residence at the age of 81.
And Yasmin, we know the Murdoch family has held the top prosecutorial position in the 14th Circuit of South Carolina for many years. But a Hilton Head newspaper is reporting that the funeral program for Randolph Murdoch said it was 87 consecutive years at one point during 3 generations of Murdochs. That is enough time to put thousands of people behind bars, according to the state newspaper. And this is addition, Yasmin, to a high-profile family practice.
A historic space mission for China, the country launching its first crewed mission since 2016, with 3 Chinese astronauts heading for the country's new space station. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frere has more on this.
Hey, Yasmin. Hello from the Gobi Desert. The launch here went off without a hitch. The rocket lifted off at 9:22 a.m. local time, carrying 3 astronauts on board. They'll spend the next 3 months docking with China's new space station to carry out maintenance work, spacewalks, and tests on systems for life support and other technical systems. This marks a milestone for China's space program. This space station is a matter of national pride, and it's especially symbolic ahead of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party being marked next month. It's also strategic. China was frozen out of the International Space Station, largely because of U.S. concerns over secrecy in the Chinese program and connections to the military. But as we know, the International Space Station is getting old. It's due to be decommissioned after 2024, and Russia has been hinting that it might withdraw its cooperation with the ISS in 2025. So that would leave China with the only space station in orbit. And while officials here have told us that this new space station will be all about international cooperation and inviting foreign astronauts to be a part of Chinese crews, there was no mention of Americans being part of that plan. There's also what we'll call a pivot east. More and more, China is cooperating with Russia on space projects. They'll build a lunar base. There's a mission to an asteroid. Russia has the deeper space experience, but China has the resources. Though Vladimir Putin did say in that interview with NBC News earlier this week that there is no change in U.S.-Russia cooperation when it comes to space, because it's the only area where the two sides tend to agree on things. Meanwhile, China is pouring billions into expanding its space program. This was the third of 11 missions that are planned to finish the space station. China wants to be a global space power, and there's every indication that it's getting there fast.
The dream of becoming a dad became a reality for a New York gay couple. But when Jose Rolón lost his husband, single parenting in the LGBTQ community had new meaning. NBC News Today's show anchor Craig Melvin has his story.
All right, so what was everybody's favorite and least favorite part of the day?
Meet Jose Rolón, a Brooklyn-based wedding planner and single dad of 3 who goes by the username NYC Gay Dad in viral videos on TikTok and Instagram.
You're making me clean again?
Don't make me destroy you. Parenting 3 kids during the pandemic gave him the creative spark that pushed him to the platform.
LGBTQ rights have been going on for quite some time. But I do think in the parenting space, we really sort of still are at the forefront of that. This was a platform to be able to highlight LGBTQ plus family here that is doing the same things that you do.
Was there a conscious decision to try and use it to break down barriers and shatter myths and preconceived ideas about what fatherhood is?
You know, I grew up with a father who was all about like machismo and, you know, you couldn't talk about your feelings. And so I think one of the things I wanted to highlight too on social media is as a man, you can be vulnerable.
Growing up, Jose always dreamed of one day becoming the kind of dad that he wished he'd had.
You had this killer smile, beautiful eyes.
After marrying his husband, Tim Merrill, in 2010, it seemed like he was one step closer to making that dream a reality.
When and how did you decide that you were ready to be parents?
When Tim and I met, I think he revealed to me on the 3rd date that he did not want to have children. And I was like, oh man, we're in trouble here, right? Because I knew that I always wanted to have kids. But something happened right after we got married and we were outside of a coffee shop and he said to me, so I want you to know that I've been open to being open to having children. I lost it.
Through surrogacy, the pair welcomed their son Avery into the world in March of 2013.
Tim ended up being this really incredible father. So when we hit 2 months, he was walking out of the room and was holding Avery in his arms. And he's like, babe, I think we should have more children. I was like, what? And we went for it.
The unexpected happened. Their surrogate became pregnant with twins. But 11 weeks into the pregnancy, while his husband Tim was on a trip in Pennsylvania, Jose got a phone call that would change everything.
And I got a call from the Pennsylvania police department. I get on the phone and the detective told me that he had passed away the night before. And it was a heart attack in his sleep. There was so much running through my head, just not only having in that moment dealing with the grieving and feeling numb, but my mind also went to, we're 11 weeks pregnant. My son just lost his father. What if something were to happen to me? I didn't want to leave him alone in this world. So I made a decision in that moment to not only follow through the pregnancy, but I actually announced that we were pregnant while giving my husband's eulogy at a church in front of 300-400 people. Here we are, 7 years later. Now my son is 8. My girls will be 7 next week.
I mean, you ever take a step back and you look at your life and you think, sweet God, what am I doing? 3 children, single dad.
Yeah, look, this ride has been wild, and I think we all go through phases of grieving. Nothing is permanent. I'm aware that this can shift like that. So for me, it's really vital that I stay in this moment and I appreciate it and I'm grateful and I keep moving forward with my kids in the best way that I can so that when those moments come where stuff goes down, hopefully I'll be ready.
What an incredible story. You can catch NBC News Now's 1-hour special, Transamerica, examining issues facing the transgender community in the United States, hosted by NBC News Now co-anchor Joe Fryer, tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.